Hey, what's up guys? In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a radar gun that I've been dreaming of testing for years. It is the MPH Ranger EZ. Now, a big shout out to 9C1 on the forums for being able to acquire one of these guns and then send it over here my way for review and testing purposes so I can shoot this video. Now, this is a pretty rare radar gun. I've never really even seen one in use. The only time I've ever seen one is back at SEMA in 2016. I found an officer who had one of these installed in his personal cars. And I had a chance to power it on and play with it, but other than that, I've never really even seen this in use. It's a pretty rare radar gun. Now, what's so special about this gun in particular? Now, if we go ahead and turn on the radar gun, you'll see everything's going to go ahead and light up. And what I want to point out is these two sets of bars here on the bottom. This is the section for the range. Now, what's nice is you're going to be able to get range information for both the primary target as well as the fastest target. If we go ahead and just fire up the gun here, clocking in stationary mode, you can see we're going to be getting our primary target lighting up here, and the distance to that target is going to be these dots here on the bottom. If it then also picks up another faster target, in addition to the primary target, that'll light up here in this orange screen under the section fast, and you'll see the orange bars will light up there. Now, each one of these bars here on the bottom actually correspond to 100 yards. So it goes from 100 yards to 1,200 yards, or about 2/3 of a mile away. And basically the idea is when you're clocking a vehicle, it'll actually give you the distance to that target. So for example, here's a run where I'm actually picking up a big truck about 700 yards away. And you'll notice that as the truck and I get closer together, the range indicator will get progressively closer and closer as well until I pass the truck. Now, why is the distance information useful in the first place? Well, one of the difficulties with running radar in general is it can be a little bit difficult to identify which vehicle you're clocking, you're targeting, especially if there's a lot of vehicles out on the road. This is easier with laser, but it's tougher with radar. There are a couple tools that the radar guns have, maybe only monitoring a certain direction and not the other direction, or looking at, both the primary target, kind of the biggest, strongest reflection, maybe a big truck, as well as maybe a secondary faster target, maybe a smaller sports car that's blasting past the big truck. And the distance information on the radar gun can just help clear up any of that sort of information and just make it a little bit easier for the officer to identify who it is that they're targeting and hopefully give the ticket to the right person. And that's really what the range information is for. For example, here's one where I'm driving and I see a car up ahead that's driving in maybe the low 40-mile-an-hour range or so. And then all of a sudden I find out there's another car behind them that's doing in the 50s. Now, if I was a cop and they were speeding and I wanted to give them a ticket, it would be a lot easier for me to tell that the person who would deserve the ticket would be the car in the rear, the white car. Similarly, here's another good example of when I'm driving and I see the strongest target is doing 36 miles an hour and it's closer. That's the red Tesla. And then the faster target is doing 51. This is one distance tick farther away, so instead of about 100 yards away, it's about 200 yards away. And if we keep driving, we'll see that this is, well, the white Volvo that we passed. Now, to be fair, even without the distance information, you can still tell which car you're clocking, especially after one car leaves a radar beam and you're measuring the other one, or even just visually identifying, officers are trained to do, which car is driving faster. But again, the distance information just makes this whole process a little bit easier. Now, what happens if vehicles are farther away and it's tougher to see them? Again, officers are supposed to use their radar guns to verify what they can already see, but the radar gun can give them additional information of something useful to keep an eye on up the road. As I'm driving up the road here, you can see, for example, that the strongest target is doing 29 miles an hour and they're about 400 yards away. There's also the fastest target, which is doing 46 miles an hour and they're 700 yards away. Now, these speeds kind of make sense because there's a red light up ahead, and so the vehicle that's closer to me is closer to the red light and they're slowing down for it. But nevertheless, having the distance information added here to the radar gun would make it more useful for me to get a better idea of what's going on ahead as I'm getting closer to those vehicles. Now, that said, even with this distance information here, it can still be challenging in some situations to tell which vehicle you're targeting, especially in situations where you've just got a lot of vehicles on the road. So it's just one extra tool that is available here with this specific radar gun. Now, something else that's pretty cool is the audio Doppler in the radar gun. There's actually not just one, but two audio Dopplers. The audio Doppler is basically the sounds that the radar guns emit that kind of mimic these same speeds that you're seeing, so that way the officers can actually hear what's going on with the radar gun, especially if they're focused on the road, or they want the audio to kind of confirm what they're seeing visually. The idea is the faster cars are driving, the higher the pitch of the radar gun, and the slower the cars are driving, the lower the pitch. Now, what's cool about this radar gun is it can do not just one, but two audio Dopplers simultaneously, both for the strongest target as well as the fastest target. Plus, because it knows the distance information, it can add that in too. The farther away the vehicles are, the quieter the signal. And then the closer the vehicles are and the stronger the reflection off that vehicle, the louder the the audio Doppler is. Plus, of course, the faster they're going, the higher the pitch. And when you're listening to that, it's a little confusing at first, but you kind of get a sense of what's going on with multiple vehicles. Now, something else that's pretty cool is if we take a look at the remote here, we'll go ahead and start transmitting. We'll do both directions up ahead. Now, let's say there's a target vehicle who we want to save their speed. We can go ahead and just lock their speed in like this. Now, the range information has also been locked too. If we go ahead and just stop transmitting real quick, that 39 miles an hour, that's the speed we locked. And then if we just hit the range button here, it's going to tell us that when we locked that speed, it was from a vehicle that was 50 yards away. We can go ahead and just start transmitting again. There's another vehicle up there. We'll go ahead and lock that, stop, hit range, and that one was 320 yards away. So that's pretty cool information. It can give you the distance for both the primary target as well as the fastest target when you lock them in and look at them afterwards. Again, usually distance information like this is something exclusive to laser guns, but this is something that's available here in a radar gun. It's not as precise. It's only plus minus 10 yards or so. It's not within like fractions of a foot or anything, but you do still have that information here. Now, I've been running this radar gun here for maybe the past 2 or 3 weeks or so, and I find that there's a lot of information that's presenting, of course, and there's even more so with the distance information. At first, it's pretty overwhelming. There's a lot of things going on, but I find that after a little while, you get used to it, and you start getting a better feel of the information it's presenting for you. It doesn't mean you're always going to know everything, of course, but you do kind of get the hang of it after you're running it for a little while. Now, one funny thing that I've found is it's pretty obvious to tell when people are not necessarily running radar detectors. And there's quite a few. I've had people just drive right by me on the highway as I'm blasting radar down the road, and they're just cruising right on by without a care in the world. And sure enough, I'm clocking them right here on my radar gun. So it's pretty funny. You can definitely tell when people aren't necessarily running radar detectors, and there's quite a few of them out there. Next, let's take a closer look at the remote itself. So we've got a bunch of different buttons here, and here's how it works. So we have the ability to transmit both with the front antenna like this, and you can see the different front lights are going to light up right there in different directions. And we can also switch and transmit with the rear antenna if we want to clock vehicles back behind us. If we want to put the detector or the radar gun back and hold, we just hit the standby button like this, and it stops transmitting, and now there's nothing for radar detectors to detect. If we want, instead of just transmitting both directions like this, if we want, we can just single things out and say only vehicles maybe opposite lane like this, vehicles coming towards us. If we want, we also have the ability to do vehicles moving away from us, and it'll clock that as well. In moving mode, it can only do one direction of travel. In stationary mode, it's actually able to do both directions simultaneously, vehicle coming toward us and vehicles moving away. Now, when we're transmitting, if there's any vehicle and we want to lock their speed, we can just hit the lock button here on screen, and it's going to go ahead and lock the speed even once we stop transmitting like this, and the vehicle speed stays locked. Now, one cool thing about this gun is you can also then display the range information. It'll tell you the distance to the target there. Now, to switch between stationary and moving modes, you actually have a button here. When you're in stationary mode like this, it's going to say stationary, and the patrol speed will be blanked. When you're moving, you can just push the moving button like this, and it switches over into moving mode, and then your patrol speed, or the speed that you as the officer are driving, will show up here on the right side of the screen. There's also an alert button right here, which I'll get into in a little bit later in the video. It's kind of a cool feature for this gun. And then it also has things like a basic menu where you can go in and do things like adjust the audio Doppler, which is kind of nice to be able to hear the different alerts that the radar gun is giving you. It's kind of audio matches what it's displaying and what you can see in real life. I'll just turn it off now for the video. And there's other things in there like the Doppler squelch. You can adjust the range of the radar gun, which, big note, just like every radar gun, this does not affect output power. It's only receive sensitivity and kind of how far away the radar gun will detect different vehicles. So output power, always exactly the same for every different radar gun. And then you've also got some patrol speeds, things like if you want to monitor maybe lower speeds, or if you're traveling on the highway, you want to do higher speeds. I'll cover this a little bit later in the video too. And then at night, there's also a backlight button. It just kind of makes the remote light up. It's a little bit easier to see at night, but not a huge deal, I guess, in the daytime. Now, the remote itself, it's wireless IR, and so it just transmits. You can see the sensor is right over there, and it just kind of talks to the radar gun like this. Now, another cool feature of the radar gun is the safety zone kind of officer safety alert system. The idea is if they're pulled over on the side of the road like this, maybe with a customer, they can turn on their rear radar antenna, and if somebody's maybe getting close and speeding from behind, the radar gun can actually let the officer know as a warning to be like, hey, maybe get out of the way, look out, there's somebody who's cruising, who's really coming from back behind. Now for this feature, we're going to go ahead and go into the second menu. Now we can set the safe speed. Basically, what speed is it going to alert you if the people are traveling faster than? You usually are going to want to set that to something faster than the speed limit. For now, we'll just go ahead and maybe lower this down to the lowest setting since we're on a city road here. Now the next option is also the safe distance, or basically how close do they have to get before you're going to get the warning. So you've got a couple options here, as you can see, and well, let's go ahead and just activate that by hitting this alert button right here. Now we'll do that, and you see it's going to say alert on the screen, and then on the display you can see the rear antenna is firing like this. And oh, there we go, it says threat, because somebody's actually driving faster back behind me than the predetermined level. And as you could hear, when that was happening, the radar gun started beeping. Now, to make it easier for the officer to hear, especially if they're outside the vehicle with their customer that they're giving a ticket to, I'll go ahead and turn this off because it keeps beeping, they can actually have it hooked up to their horn, to their lights and sirens even, maybe even as a warning of the person who's driving back behind them. So kind of a cool extra safety feature that the officers have. And because it has the distance information, it can also kind of narrow it down to only vehicles that are closer to them and more of a threat. Now, taking a closer look at the radar gun itself, the counting unit, kind of the main brains and display, is actually huge. It's way bigger than, say, the MPH B3, for example, which is much smaller here than the Ranger. Additionally, the wiring harness coming out of the back of the radar gun for power and your speedometer measurement, that is a really big, thick, huge wiring harness. Now, if you look at all the cables that are plugged into this thing, there's a whole bunch of them that are involved. You've got your power, and then you've also got stuff to tap into the vehicle's speedometer here. I wish there was like an OBD2 connector or something, but you got a serial port and a couple that are designed to kind of tap into the OBD2 or the speedometer. In fact, if you look at the manual, there's a big section of the manual that's just designed for like telling you all the information for how you wire into a variety of different vehicles. So I think OBD2 would have been a little bit easier, but that's kind of how it works here. Now, the point of wiring into your vehicle speedometer is there's a couple benefits. Number one, the radar gun can automatically switch between stationary mode and moving mode for you. Additionally, it's going to help it avoid some of the errors that the radar gun may display. Shadowing, combining errors, for example. And I've definitely seen some of those errors here with the Ranger. There's things like some combining errors where I'm driving and my patrol speed is about twice as high as it should be because of reflections off of some vehicles up ahead. Similarly, I've also seen some target speeds that are reporting about twice as fast as they should be. Now, the radar gun has some capabilities of trying to minimize these kind of errors. When you're getting some of these things like the harmonics, for example, there's actually a little harmonic LED that lights up in the bottom right-hand corner of the target window, and it just lets you know that, hey, it may be reporting some errors and it's trying to minimize those. But nevertheless, some of them do come through here on the radar gun. Something else to note is the range of the radar gun. I have noticed some issues, particularly with one of the antennas that I was testing. I was finding I could easily see cars up the road, but the radar gun was not able to clock those vehicles. I tried repositioning the antenna on different places in my windshield with no luck, but I actually did have luck when I swapped and tried the other antenna. That one seems to work better and it gives me better range. I don't know if that's just something about this particular gun being used or whatever, but that's just something I noticed. The other antenna seems to work better, and so I've been running this one as my primary, and I've got the other one now set up as the rear antenna, or well, at least just sitting on the rear seats right now for this video so I can demo some of the features. Now, one other feature to point out real quick to help avoid some of those errors, when you switch the radar gun into moving mode like this, it has two different modes for city or highway operation. You can see right now it says C right there is for city operation. If we go to the remote here and we hit the plus button, kind of your high-speed patrolling, so patrol at high speeds, this is going to be more for your highway driving. And then again, you can always switch back to low speeds like this, and this is going to be for your city driving. Now, one other feature to point out is the fan defeat feature. One really common issue with radar guns is they can actually pick up the fans in your vehicle for your air conditioning and whatnot, and incorrectly and inadvertently display that on the radar gun as if it's another speed. And it can also kind of conflict with trying to measure the speed of vehicles up ahead. You can actually get special kind of metal shielding that goes under the antennas to help minimize that. And with this radar gun, because it has distance information, it has a feature to attempt to kind of filter out these false alerts. Now, this is called the fan defeat feature right here, and you can go in and turn it on and off as you like, but I found that even with the feature turned on, I still have issues running my fan. And so instead of picking up other vehicles, it's kind of showing my fan speed, and I can crank my fan up and down to adjust the speed showing on the radar gun. This is designed to ignore any sort of speeds that are detected within 10 yards or so, but for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to be working here in my vehicle. For that reason, I've been having to run with my fan and heat and everything shut off, even though it's, well, wintertime and cold and around freezing. Thank goodness for heated seats, but yeah, so I've been running, I guess, without my heat. That way, at least I can still use the radar gun. Now, taking a closer look at the antenna itself, it uses a K-band antenna. Now, the K-band antenna, it's going to be, of course, much bigger than the Ka-band antenna, like the one I have here for the MPH B3. Now, to do all this distance measurement stuff, you can't just use a traditional continuous wave radar signal. You're actually going to need to do some sort of modulation to the signal. I've got a whole video kind of explaining this in more detail about how blind spot filtering works. You can check out that video. But I know this particular antenna has to have some sort of modulation. I don't actually know what kind of modulation it uses. And so next I've taken the Ranger and I've sent it over to the crew at Redenso for further analysis. As you guys know, they've been hard at work on Thea, and one of the things that they're doing kind of in its training process is they're recording a lot of different radar sources, police radar guns, door openers, blind spot falses, etc., and teaching Thea how to actually tell the difference. And they've been kind enough to help us take a closer look at the Ranger to see how it works. So first off, starting with the antenna, if you pop it open and take a look inside, you'll see that it's very nicely machined. It still uses your traditional circularly polarized K-band signal, but what they found is when they hooked it up to the oscilloscope, they found that the Ranger is actually modulating between two different tones. And when you look at the signal here in the time domain, you'll see this reflected as a square wave pattern. The signal is transmitting at one frequency, then it drops to a lower frequency, then a higher frequency, then a lower frequency, and back and forth like this. If we then look at the same signal here in the frequency domain, it's going to look like a narrow band of continuous wave-like tones. The main carrier is going to be the tallest center frequency, and then to the right you have the second frequency, and the gun is rapidly switching back and forth between transmitting at these two frequencies. The rest of the signals are probably just harmonics, and on the left side you have a mirror image of the same thing. Now, what's key here is the fact that the gun is modulating its signal to transmit at two different frequencies. It knows when it bumps up to a higher frequency and then when it bumps back down to a lower frequency. And it's basically just looking for how long it takes for all of these changes in frequency to go out. And then it's measuring the time of flight to come back, which then it can correlate to distance. If we were to visualize that here real quick, here's a look at the transmitted frequency and the received frequency. They're going to look the same, of course, right? They're both the same square waves. Now, if we're targeting a car that's 0 feet away, it's not going to take any time for that reflected signal to come back, so the two signals are basically going to overlap with one another. However, as the target car starts to drive farther and farther away from the radar gun, it's going to start to take more and more time for that transmitted signal to hit the car and bounce back. And then we're going to see that time it takes reflected by a change in phase as the signal starts to, well, take longer and longer to come back. And we can measure this phase difference here and then turn it back into an estimate of distance. And then again, if the car turns around and starts driving back towards the radar gun, we're going to start to see the two signals start to overlap more and more because it's taking less and less time for that reflection to come back. And so that's the general idea here of how the Ranger is able to determine distance information. It's basically just modulating the signal and seeing how long it takes for the reflected signal that looks similar to come back. And then coming back to Thea is basically being trained to recognize these different kind of patterns and signatures in different radar signals. With the extra information that's available here in the Ranger, once Thea comes out, this is actually going to make it the easiest police radar gun for it to recognize and classify. I mean, over a year ago at SEMA, we had a chance to look at a prototype of Thea, and even that one was already able to recognize and classify different continuous wave police radar guns like the MPH B3 or the custom Falcon HR. And those are actually much more similar and more difficult to differentiate and classify. If Thea was already able to differentiate between those, recognizing what a Ranger looks like is pretty trivial. I mean, there's a lot more information that's built into that signal, and it makes it a lot easier. Photo radar, it's actually going to be easier still, and the same thing with blind spot signals. Those have so much different types of modulation patterns that it makes it a lot easier for something that's really looking at this level of detail to actually tell the difference between. But anyway, yeah, that's just a quick look at how the MPH Ranger looks, kind of the signal that it's transmitting, and how it actually works from kind of a technical perspective, as well as kind of an operational perspective and how an officer would be using the gun. So a big thanks to 9C1 for actually sending the gun over here so I can take a look at it, and thanks to the crew at Redenso for helping us all learn some of the more technical detail that we wouldn't, I guess, have another way to learn. And so, yeah, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.